Webinar is titled Understanding the EMS Compact, presented by Donnie Woodyard, Executive Director of the EMS Compact. I'm going to pass it over now to our presenter. Donnie, thank you so much for being here with us today to share your knowledge and experience with us, and we look forward to the presentation.
Hey, thank you so very much. It's a pleasure and a joy to be here. And I hope that over the next hour or so, we have a good time of sharing experiences and discussing interstate compacts in general, and very specifically the EMS Compact. As we go through the presentation, I'm happy to take any questions that come up. I will also do a dedicated Q&A period at the end of the presentation as time allows. So with that being said, let me go on and hop forward here. So real briefly about myself, if I don't know you, it's a pleasure to at least virtually meet you or see your name on the screen. So as Rio said, my name's Donnie. I'm the Executive Director of the EMS Compact. I've been in this particular role since July of this past year. Prior to that, I've served as the state EMS director in 2 states, Colorado and Louisiana. I previously served as the chair of the Interstate Commission for EMS Personnel Practice when I was a commissioner appointed by the governor of Colorado. And I also previously served as the COO of the National Registry. I am a paramedic by background, 30 years in EMS. Been an educator and everything from a urban to a frontier to a rural paramedic, flight paramedic, in critical care. So with that being said, let's go and hop into today's Con Ed. I did put some objectives here. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't have these, talking to a bunch of educators. But essentially, we're going to go over the foundations of the Interstate Compact and Interstate Compacts in general. I want to make sure that everyone understands some key terminology. As educators, this is changing, and unfortunately, the textbooks have not yet caught up with this change in jurisprudence. We're going to talk about how the integration of the EMS Compact principles can be integrated into EMS education. And then finally, we want to make sure that the students have a complete understanding of the Interstate Compact that will impact students across the nation now. So first, before we get into the EMS Compact, I want to just first dive into the foundation of what are Interstate Compacts. And if you are saying, well, I don't really understand them, well, you're not alone. In fact, Interstate Compacts, while they're not new, they're oftentimes in the background. And even when it comes to a matter of law, we find that there's actually very few lawyers that even receive training on Interstate Compacts. So it's a very niche area that's very much coming to the forefront over the past decade. But at the very foundation, Interstate Compacts are legal agreements between states that bind member states to the provisions in the same matter as a contract would. And so the thing that really comes out of this is EMS Compacts are legal agreements, they are a law, but they also function as a contract. And that's very important because this is an instrument between states to solve issues outside of their own jurisdictional border that has not been resolved through federal law. So interstate compacts are agreements. Now we're going to really focus in on the compacts as a function of occupational licensing, but know that there are many, many types of compacts out there. As we go through this is from the Council of State Governments, but interstate compacts, they're a tool that dates back to the colonial days. And again, as we talked about in the last slide, they create a legal binding agreement amongst different states. And when I say states, that can also include districts like the District of Columbia and territories like Puerto Rico. So it's states, districts, and territories. It's independent bodies of government. Interstate compacts promote cooperation amongst individual states or jurisdictions to solve issues common between them. And interstate compacts are widely recognized. They are a part of the very core of how our nation works. There are over 250 active compacts in the United States, And on average, states are a member of about 25 compacts. That number is actually going up, and it's touching 30 or more right now on average. There's been a surge in the past 5 years of interstate compacts. So interstate compacts are very, very common. They're out there, and they're well tested. In fact, the Council of State Governments also calls interstate compacts the gold standard. And in particular, occupational licensure compacts, which the EMS Compact is one of many, are a gold standard of policy for states to improve license portability. Interstate compacts also enhance public protection through the provision of uniform standards. And so that's really, really key. Let me give an example that is a compact that many of you probably have used, yet you probably had no idea you were using it. And that is the driver's license compact. And so if I were in a traditional classroom, I would say, how many of you have ever driven in a different state than you're not licensed in? And chances are everyone with a driver's license raises their hand. Now, from an educational perspective and from a legal perspective, I want you to think about what's actually happening when you drive in a different state. Because of state jurisdiction, because of state sovereignty, the state that you are in, its laws and regulations only extend to the borders of that state. That's the geographic, geopolitical border of that state. I live in Colorado. I have a Colorado driver's license that is issued by the state of Colorado, giving me a privilege to drive in the state of Colorado. But Colorado has no legal authority in Kansas or in Virginia. The Colorado laws don't apply there. But how am I able to take a Colorado license and drive in another state? Well, this goes back many, many years where people realized, well, hey, when you drive cars, that invisible geopolitical boundary shouldn't be a boundary. I shouldn't have to stop and get a new license. Can you imagine driving from Colorado to Virginia? In every state I stopped in, I had to go and take a driver's license exam and apply for a license. And many, many decades ago, we realized, well, that's kind of ridiculous and not practical. So the states came together and they said, well, let's first come together with basic requirements for driving. Before we issue a license, there were some basic requirements. So for instance, you might be a great driver at 8 years old, but we're not going to give you a license, right? And by the way, before you get a license, you need to be able to show that you understand what a stop sign means and how to drive at a four-way stop sign and what red lights mean and what lane you should be in. So those are some of the standards that states agreed upon years ago for the driver's license compact. And because of that, states then said, I will recognize your license if you recognize my license. So that solves the first part of a compact. So a unique set of standards shared amongst states before granting a license. The second part of a compact is related to how do you enforce the laws and the regulation. And so that's through a whole nother part of the compact related to discipline. So for instance, if I'm driving in Kansas and I decide that I want to test out, a Tesla and go 140 miles per hour, sure, I can do that. But if I get caught and I break the law of Kansas, one, I'm subject to the laws of the state I'm in. Number two, they have the full authority to investigate and to hold me accountable. And they can take me to jail. They can put me before court. They can do all these things. The one thing they can't do is Kansas can't actually take my driver's license because it's issued by the state of Colorado. But what Kansas can do is try me, convict me, hold me accountable, put me to prison, fine me, report it to my insurance through the insurance compact, by the way. And then that entire package can be sent back to Colorado, where Colorado can look at that and say, oh, yeah, that would have been a violation in our state. So we are going to take action and we're going to revoke your license. So that's one example of a compact that many of us use for a long time. And it's kind of second nature. We don't think about it. So let's move forward into this conversation of occupational licensing compacts. When we talk about occupational licensure compacts, there are currently 15, and there's more coming on every day. Many of you may have heard about the Nurse Licensing Compact or the Enhanced Nurse Licensure Compact, but there are many others. There's a Cosmetology Compact, there's a Teacher Compact, there's Occupational Therapy Compact, there's Physical Therapy and Physician Assistants and Psychology. There's many, many compacts, and these compacts are accelerating across the nation. Now, one of the reasons I believe compacts are accelerating is that not only the workforce today is mobile, but our population is very mobile. If you think back to the baby boom generation and go back a few generations, it was very common for people to live and grow up in the same area, maybe around the same radius. Sure, they might occasionally travel, but for most part, life started and stopped within a certain geographic area. And that's just not the case today. The other thing is that people expect the same type of care regardless of the jurisdiction that they are in. So if someone wants to, for instance, get physical therapy in Virginia, the expectation is that physical therapy provided in Virginia is essentially the same as Michigan, which is essentially the same as California, Florida, or any other state. So the concept of professions having vastly different ways or standards is no longer accepted. The public expects a uniform standard across the nation, especially in medical professions. So because of that, states have said, well, we have essentially the same standard. We have a workforce that desires to be very mobile. We have a population that's very mobile. So therefore, we need to reduce this burden of individual licensing. I want to transition into the actual EMS Compact. And the EMS Compact has a number of different names and different components. So the common name that I use and that you probably have heard is simply called the EMS Compact. That is nothing more than a brand name. You won't find the EMS Compact in law. That's the brand. But let's break down the components within that. First is replica. Replica, which you may have heard of, is the recognition of EMS Personnel Licensure Interstate Compact. It's the acronym. The A kind of gets slid in to the end of compact there, but it's the recognition of EMS Personnel Licensure Interstate Compact. And that's the name of the legislation. That's the actual legislation that is passed, and it's called a model piece of legislation, and I'll go into that here in a few minutes. So that's the name of that bill. That legislation creates two additional components. It creates the Interstate Commission for EMS Personnel Practice. And I'll break that down in a little bit, but the commission is the governing body that actually operationalizes and operates the compact. And it also creates the National EMS Coordinated Database. We refer to that as NAEMSE. So the EMS Compact is the brand. Replica is the acronym for the legislation. The commission is the body responsible for managing the compact. And then the coordinated database is, well, the database. As we look at the history of the EMS Compact, it really goes back to 2012. And some would say it predates that, but 2012 is when really the gears started getting into motion. In 2012, the NAEMSE, the National Association of State EMS Officials, partnered with the Department of Homeland Security, DHS. And they came together to discuss an issue that was plaguing the nation at the time, and arguably still today. And in particular, Homeland Security has hundreds, if not thousands, of EMS personnel. And these personnel are with entities that are components of Homeland Security that are numerous. And these individuals are oftentimes required to practice in multiple states, sometimes on short notice or no notice. And the concept of having a federal EMS provider actually hold 50 different licenses was not only impractical and cumbersome, but there had to be some better way of doing it. And at the time, the Nurse Licensure Compact had already started as one of the first foreruns of occupational licensing compacts. And so DHS funded a project with NAEMSE to say, how can we solve this issue for EMS? Now, getting to that point of solving the issue required states to have common standards, have common licensure requirements, common education and training requirements. And if many of you, like me, remember back to even in the early 2000s and the late 90s, one survey that was done in the late 90s found 40 different versions of EMT, not only with nomenclature, but different tweaks to training and requirements and licensure names across the nation. So we had some work to do. In 2013, a national advisory panel was formed. This included 24 individual representatives from organizations, and that ranged from the fire chiefs and the IFF to the NAEMSE and flight paramedic associations, and I think maybe NAEMSE. I need to look at my notes on that, but there were many organizations at the table there representing a broad perspective of the industry. They came together as an advisory panel and they created an outline of what the compact should do and how it should operate. They looked at the existing compacts that were already in law, driver's license compact, nursing compact, and a few others. And they said, what can we do for the EMS industry? And then a subgroup of that was a drafting team that included 5 organizations. And that team created what's called the model legislation. And in 2014, that model legislation was released to the nation for states to look at. And so there was a process of education and enactment. And so between 2014 and 17, state officials were educated, legislators were educated, governors were educated, and the industry started being educated about the EMS Compact. The EMS Compact stated that 10 states had to enact the compact before the compact becomes an entity. And let me just explain that real quick. Compacts in general, as we talked about, are law and contracts between states. And so by definition, you need 2 or more entities to enter into a contract. And so you can have a compact that starts with just 2 states. However, many licensing compacts say, well, we need more than 2. And that's a number that is set by the drafters of the model legislation. That number might be 5 states and territories. It could be 30 states and territories. The EMS Compact required 10. So in 2017, 10 states had actually passed the replica legislation into state law. And when Georgia passed the legislation in 2017, then the compact actually became a bona fide government body. The compact wasn't activated yet, even though it existed, because now you have to do all the work of standing up a government body. In 2020, the compact was activated, and today we currently have 24 states that have enacted the law, covering approximately 400,000 EMS personnel. Here's a map of the current states, and as you can see here, we almost stretch coast to coast. This map is increasing rapidly. Every year we add a few states to the map, but right now we're thrilled. Utah and Oklahoma just enacted the compact in the past couple months. So we currently have 24 states and nearly 400,000 EMS personnel. So chances are that either the state that you are currently teaching in, the state that you may have came from, or the state that your students are going to work in are probably members of the EMS Compact. If not today, very shortly. So let's walk through again some of the more specifics about compacts and replica itself. As I mentioned before, model legislation, that's very, very important. Because a compact is a combination of state law and a contract, every party to a contract must agree to the same terms. So if you've ever entered into a contractual agreement, you know it would be ludicrous for you to sign one version of the contract and the other party to agree to completely different terms. That's not a contract. That doesn't work. That's not enforceable. So what it is enforceable is with, is when all parties agree to the same terms. That's where the model legislation comes into play, because unlike a typical contract where you sign it and slide it across the table and the other party signs it and sends it back to you, this has to be done through state law. So the model legislation, which was drafted in 2014, is the same in every state, and it cannot be changed on any matters of importance. You might add a small clarification to it, but in general, it has to be exactly the same in every single state. Now, because of that, EMS compacts, including the EMS Compact, create what's called a super state government. That super state government lies between state government and federal government, and contract law combined with compact law supersedes state law if there was a conflict. And that's due to the supremacy clause. It's the same clause that allows for a state, for instance, if there's a local ordinance that is passed by, say, a city or county, and if that's in conflict with state law, well, the supremacy clause says that state law trumps local ordinance. If there's a state law that's in conflict with federal law trumps state law. When it comes to compact law, because compacts supersede state law and county law or local ordinance, compact law rules in any conflict. So compact law will supersede that. So this is a reference to that from a bench book. A bench book is a guide for lawyers and judges, and this is a reference to state law and compacts. Moving forward, let's talk about the commission real quick. So the commission is first and foremost a government body. You'll notice that the EMS Compact website is emscompact.gov. The commission is the operational arm of the compact and is a government institution. The commission, by law, is required to oversee the operations and the management of the compact. Each state, the governor of each state, is responsible for appointing a delegate, which is also referred to as a commissioner. And that delegate or that commissioner represents the state at the commission body. Typically, the governor delegates the appointment of the delegate to a cabinet secretary. So Secretary of Health or Secretary of Public Safety. And the state law also says that the commissioner should be the individual in the executive branch responsible for the licensure of EMS personnel. So this is not just a random governor appointment. This is the executive branch person, typically the state EMS director, that is appointed by the governor. Each state and each commissioner has one vote. The commission itself has rulemaking authority, just as a state does. Any administrative rules created by the commission have the effect of law, and all meetings are public. Just as any government meeting is public by definition, the commission is public as well. So a few bits of additional terminology that's really key for educators to know as you are helping to explain this new jurisprudence to your students. And so within specific to the EMS Compact, the EMS Compact has member states. All compacts have member states. A member state is any state, jurisdiction, territory that has enacted the compact. So when a state passes the law that's signed by the governor and it's active as law in the state, that state is now a member state of the compact. Within the EMS Compact, we have a home state and a remote state. This is where it gets a little confusing. A home state, for the purposes of the EMS Compact, is any member state where an individual is licensed by that state. It's not where you reside. It's not where you live. It's not where you have a driver's license. Keep that in mind. A home state is the state that you are licensed in. For the purposes of the EMS Compact, you can have multiple home states. I'm currently licensed as a paramedic in Colorado and Louisiana and Ohio. But for the purposes of the compact, Ohio and Louisiana are my home states because they're a member state that I'm licensed in. It has nothing to do with where I live. A remote state, and unfortunately I have Latin in there. I missed that on proofreading. I will translate that for you of what it intends to say. And that is a remote state is any member state that is part of the compact where the individual is not licensed in. So I'm licensed in 2 of the 24 member states. The other 22 states are remote states for me. A privilege to practice is an individual authority to work, to practice, to deliver EMS in a remote state based on my home state license. Real quick about license. I understand that some states use the phrase certification. That's a whole nother topic I would love to discuss at some point. But essentially, legally, anything issued by a state granting a practice authority is a license. It doesn't matter what you call it. And the compact has a crosswalk section in it where it clearly says, it doesn't matter what you call it in your state, but when your state passes the EMS compact legislation, the authorization that the state grants for the purpose of the compact is a license. And then appropriate authority is any entity that is authorized to license or supervise, hire, or otherwise utilize EMS personnel. Let's move forward. Let's talk a little bit about the core of a home state. This is part of the core of what a requirement is for the home state. As we discussed earlier, compacts set a standard foundation, and then with that standard foundation, just like the driver's license compact, state A says, well, we have the same requirements, so I will recognize yours and you recognize mine. For the compact, in state law that has passed the compact, each state has agreed to require National Registry of EMT examination as a prerequisite for initial state licensure. The compact does not require that EMS personnel maintain registry, but it does require that the state shall utilize the NREMT exam before issuing a license. That's part of the core standardization. Number 2, states are required to have a mechanism in place for receiving and investigating complaints. They're required to notify the commission of any adverse action of any discipline. They're required to have a criminal background check that is compliant with a biometric fingerprint check conducted by the FBI. And then finally, they have to comply with all the rules of the commission. Those are the requirements on the state. Those are not the requirements on the individual. That's the requirement of the state. The state shall do each of these 5 things. Next, let's talk about the privilege to practice. So it says in the state law, member states shall, and from your background in law and education and reading law, you understand that when a law says shall, there is no wiggle room. May provides some wiggle room. Shall, it shall be done. So in state law, it says member states shall recognize the privilege to practice of an individual licensed in any other member state. So Colorado shall recognize the license issued by the 23 other states. Doesn't matter what, any member of the executive branch says, that's the requirement. For the privilege to practice to be active, the individual has to be at least 18 years of age. The compact recognizes state sovereignty. That's a very important component of compacts. So if a state, and there are compact states that choose to do this, if a state wants to license someone who is younger than 18, that's a state decision. However, that individual might be licensed, but they can't use that license in any other state until they're at least 18 years old. Number two, the individual must have a current unrestricted license as an EMT, AMT, paramedic, or a level between EMT and paramedic. So, if you are an EMT intermediate, you're in the compact. If you're an EMT cardiac technician or shock trauma or any of these old terms, that are out there, you're part of the compact as long as you're properly licensed and over 18. And then number three is you have to practice under the supervision of a medical director. Next, accountability. This is the nice way of saying discipline and investigation. This is that same example that I gave when driving 140 miles per hour in Kansas. Yep. So in EMS, and if an individual is licensed in a home state, and that home state suspends, restricts, otherwise, revokes, then that immediately revokes the privilege to practice under the compact. That kind of makes sense. A remote state, however, has new authority. Under the compact, states gain authority. States gain authority on personnel who are not licensed in their state but are working in their state, and they have the authority to restrict, suspend, investigate, revoke the privilege to practice. They can't revoke the home state license, but they can shut down practice, they can do investigations, and then they're required to report that to the home state. They must notify the home state. And now here's the key. If any state in the compact takes a discipline action, the privilege to practice is suspended nationwide. Now, because the compact doesn't take the home state license, let's say that Mary is working as a EMT in Alabama under a privilege to practice, and Alabama does a proper investigation and revokes that privilege to practice, but Mary's also licensed in another state. The privilege to practice is suspended, but her home state license remains intact. Now, chances are really high that that home state is going to review the case file and probably take action as well, but they're not required to, because that's a property right. That license is owned by that state, and that state has the ultimate authority to revoke, suspend, ignore what another state did. That's part of state sovereignty and state jurisdiction. So next, let's walk through some of the core components for practice. And I want to first really highlight this because this is not just a compact issue. As a state regulator, this represents something that I encountered all the time. And I believe it's something that is missed as we prepare EMS students. So you're familiar with this. This dates back to the EMS education agenda and the EMS agenda for the future. It dates back decades now. But we recognize that EMS personnel have to be educated, certified, licensed, and credentialed. Well, we've done a great job on the education part. I think we've done a great job on the certification part. The next two components get a little shaky. As a state regulator, I cannot tell you how many people that got their national certification and did not understand the importance of being licensed in a state. So they would start working and be working without a license. That's a problem. And then the fourth element of that is credentialing, local level credentialing. That's something that is vastly misunderstood in our industry. But you have to have all four of those things in place before you're legally allowed to practice. Just look at me as an example. So I'm educated as a paramedic, I'm certified, I'm licensed, and I'm licensed in those three states, currently as of today, Colorado, Louisiana, Ohio. However, I am a desk paramedic today. I finally achieved that. I don't take care of patients every day. I am not locally credentialed. I am not employed with an EMS entity or an agency. I don't have a physician medical director. I don't have protocols. I don't have an authorization to actually administer medication. I'm licensed, I'm educated, I'm certified, I am not credentialed. Therefore, I'm a paramedic in name, but not in practice. That's a key element. So I can call myself a paramedic. It would be wrong for me to go out and start an IV tomorrow. And it doesn't matter if I, where I do that, it'd be wrong. Now let's look at the compact. Let's add the compact to this. Again, using me as an example. Well, Colorado and Louisiana are compact states. Ohio's not yet. I hope that they will be in the future. So I have a theoretical privilege to practice in 22 other states, in addition to Colorado and Louisiana. And now Ohio, I have a license there. So I'm licensed or with a privilege in 25 states. I still can't go out and work tomorrow because I'm not credentialed with a local agency and I don't have a medical director. So I am not authorized to practice. I have a privilege, but I'm not authorized to practice. And so the concept is very much the same, regardless if I'm talking about a compact privilege or if I'm just talking about my state license. I have to be authorized to practice through local level credentialing. So real quick for credentialing. Local level credentialing is required for practice, period, compact or non-compact. Agency and entity that I'm affiliated with or I'm going to be credentialed by, they have to be legally authorized to provide EMS care or utilize EMS personnel. Now, the easy examples of this is an ambulance agency or a non-transport EMS agency. Those are traditional, right? And so that's pretty straightforward. But EMS is vastly changing. And it changes by state, by state, by state. Laws are different. In some states, as a paramedic or an EMT, I might be allowed to work in a hospital. I might be allowed to work in a doctor's office or an occupational health or on an oil rig. If your state law allows that, great. But that is the entity that's required to do the credentialing. The EMS Compact also very specifically requires physician medical direction. We understand in some states, there might be state law that allows for non-physicians to provide medical direction. The EMS Compact is very clear. For a compact privilege to practice, it must be a physician medical director. You have to have a defined scope of practice. You have to have protocols. You have to have a quality assurance process. And if you're utilizing medications or equipment, you have to have that DEA, FDA authorization. Again, this is all components of that local level credentialing that carries forward compact or non-compact. The simple answer to the question of, well, what's an authorized agency? Who can credential me? Well, from a compact perspective, the question I always ask is that entity legally authorized to use EMS personnel licensed in the state? And if the answer is yes, then the answer for the compact question is yes. If that entity is not allowed to utilize EMS personnel, they can't utilize compact personnel. That's very simple. The compact is not a end around state law. The compact requires you, the entity, to operate within existing state law. It just is an alternative to getting a license issued by the state. Now, moving forward, the coordinated database. The compact created by law, the EMS coordinated database. The coordinated database does a number of things. The key to the database is the 12-digit EMS ID number. The EMS ID number, and you can see mine up here. That's my real one. You can see that number is there, and it shows that I have a privilege of practice. It shows where I'm licensed in, my expiration dates. It shows all of that right there. The coordinated database, for the first time in the history of our profession, is deduplicating state licensure data. Up until this database, we had no idea how many EMS personnel were actually licensed in America. Think about that. It's 2023. We had no idea how many individuals. If you take just in sum, well, this is the number of EMTs in Ohio and the number of paramedics in Colorado. Well, cool. But guess what? I'm in 3 of those databases today. I've been in 8 of those databases before. I encounter people every day that are in 15 different state databases. We had no way of deduplicating that. The coordinated database does that. The coordinated database is also primary source data and includes near real-time status updates of things like expiration dates, adverse action, discipline, and the privilege to practice status. As 10 years as a regulator, I cannot tell you how many times I was involved with tracking down people who were state hopping. They would do something bad in state A, they would leave the state before the investigation finished, they would get licensed in state B, then state C, then state D, and they would constantly try to stay one step ahead of the tsunamious disaster of bad patient care, violation of state law, bad practice. The coordinated database eliminates that because it shares all that information in near real time amongst all the compact states. This is essential for increasing the professionalism of our profession and increasing public protection. So I'm coming up to the end here, so be thinking about your questions. So a few things to remember. Scope of practice. Number 1, I encourage, and the compact requires, that you fight like you train. That's a phrase from our military. So fight like you train. What does that mean? When it comes to scope of practice, the compact says you shall use your home state scope of practice until modified by an appropriate authority. Now, let me explain that. The compact provides a number of examples of when you can utilize the scope of practice, but for simplicity's sake, I'm going to boil that down into 2 buckets. Bucket 1 is I am in a home state employed by an agency that is properly authorized to hire me, and that the agency has everything in place, medical director, FDA license, DEA, all that, right? So I am working there, and I pick up someone in that state, and I need to drive across the state line and take that patient to a hospital, okay? Or I need to fly from state A to state B, and I'm flying, okay? I am with the same employer. I'm originating care in a home state, and I'm moving to a remote state with that patient. It would be ludicrous for me to change scope of practice and protocols and medical director at this invisible state line. That'd be not good for the patient, not good for me, and we all agree upon that. So the compact says, in that scenario, use your home state protocols, your home state scope of practice. That carries with you to the end. Scenario B is a little bit different. Scenario B is there's a huge, event going on somewhere else in the nation. and I want to go and I want to be a medic at the NASCAR event, at the festival, or I want to go and get experience working as a medic in a frontier system or an urban system, whatever. So I go as an individual to that entity in the remote state, say, I want to be part of your team. Well, great. That entity has to choose then to affiliate me. They have to choose to hire me, paid or not paid. They have to choose to bring me on board. And at that point, I'm being credentialed by that local agency in the remote state. I will operate under that remote state's laws, under that agency's protocols, under that agency's medical direction, just as if I was licensed in that state. And if that employer says, sorry, thanks, but no thanks, well, okay, that's their choice. But I then start operating under that remote state scope of practice and protocols. Let me give an example. Maybe in my home state, I'm authorized to do surgical crikes. And in the remote state, that's not legal. That's not part of the scope of practice. I can't go to an agency in the remote state and say, yeah, but I'm a Colorado paramedic, I'm going to do this. No, I have to follow that state's rules. Just like you can't drive into another state and say, the speed limit back home is this. They're going to say you're out of your mind. Here's our speed limit. So you shall follow the rules and the laws and regulations of the state you're working in. Agencies, real quick. We understand that personnel have to be part of an agency, but agencies themselves are not part of the compact. Agencies are licensed different. They are held to a different set of rules and regulations and standards. The compact solves the issue for the person. The agency still has to be legally authorized to operate in wherever jurisdiction they're operating in. They have to be licensed, they have to adhere to the state rules, etc. And then finally, credentialing is essential. So a few resources, 3 websites for you. And the first is emscompact.gov. This is the official website of the EMS Compact. And you can find everything about privilege to practice status. You can validate that. You can find out who the states are, who the commissioners are, etc. Second website is compacts.csg.org. And that's the National Center for Interstate Compacts, and that is housed by the Council of State Governments. The Council of State Governments is a nonprofit organization that actually brings together all the state government officials, and it's a clearinghouse of information and coordination for state officials. And so that's an incredible website about compacts in general. And then at the bottom, this is the Interstate Commission for the Adult Offender Supervision. And this compact, it's not an occupational licensing compact. It's for basically adults who are, in prison and have been subject to the law. There's a compact for about everything out there, but they provided this bench book. A bench book, as I referenced earlier, is a resource for lawyers and for judges as they are learning about compact law. And while some of this is very specific to the adult offender compact, everything about general compacts applies to the occupational compact. So that's a great resource. 2 books I would plug, one shamelessly. The first on the left is The Evolving Law and Use of Interstate Compacts. This is the book for legal understanding of compacts. This is by the American Bar, published by the American Bar Association. And so Rick Masters, who is listed here, was one of the legal advisors for the EMS Compact in the authoring days. Currently, it's PWW with Doug Wolfberg. They are the counsel for the EMS Compact. But this is a incredible book, and it's meant by lawyers, for judges that talk about the law of compacts. And then the second is my newly published book. I have a couple chapters in there talking about both the history of replica and how EMS compacts work, and that's at emshistory.com. So with that, I will take questions, and I'm also going to put my contact information up here briefly. So I'm happy to take any questions that are out there. So Rio, any questions?
Yes, so it looks like we have 3 questions so far.
Excellent.
First question, Joel asks, how does an employer in a remote state know if a licensee's privilege to practice has been suspended in that remote state?
Yep. Excellent. So it goes back to that website. So right here. So this is on the EMS Compact website. This is currently the way to do it. And so you would need to have the individual's EMS ID number. You plug it in here, and you can see they have a compact privilege to practice. Now, we have 24 states in the compact, but unfortunately, not every state has connected their database. And so we have states that are working to connect their licensure databases, but the stance is, if it doesn't show up on the website, there is no privilege to practice. And so this is the way to do it. The compact is working on some enhanced technology solutions for the future that we are looking forward to probably in the next 18 to 24 months that will provide a lot of resources for employers, probably things like push notifications and a lot of other resources that will allow the employer to get notifications in near real time if the compact privilege changes, if a state license changes, if something expires, or if there's discipline. That's coming up in the future.
All right, our next question. Is the EMS Compact similar to the Nursing Compact?
Yes and no. So from the category of yes, they're both occupational licensing compacts. There are some differences, though. The Nursing Compact provides a multi-state license, and there's some nuanced differences in that. Bottom line is the Nursing Compact requires one and only one home state, and that's the state that you are permanently residing in and licensed in. The EMS Compact allows for multiple home states. The Nursing Compact provides a license that is recognized in the remote state, whereas the Compact provides a privilege to practice, which is a phraseology difference, but it's very similar to the driver's license, where when you drive in another state, you're not driving on a license in Kansas, and you don't have to request it. It's automatic. So with the EMS Compact, if you show up here when you put in the EMS ID number, your privilege is automatically recognized everywhere. You don't request it. You don't pay for it. You don't fill out an application for it. It's automatic. Some of the other licensing compacts essentially are a expedited reciprocity, where you are licensed in one state and you want to be licensed in another state. You use the compact and they issue a license. This actually avoids that, where it's an automatic privilege that's there and you don't have to do anything for it as long as you meet the requirements.
All right. Eric asks, with Nevada's recent addition to the EMS Compact and Clark County's Southern Nevada Health District autonomy under state law, is it accurate to say SNHD can apply additional licensing requirements to PTP personnel, essentially withdrawing them from the compact?
Lots of nuance in that question. So I'm not prepared to offer a legal opinion on that. What I can tell you is that Nevada passed one law that is compact legislation law that supersedes other laws if there was a conflict. That goes back to the supremacy clause. Individual employers still have the authority to credential. They have the authority. An employer, for instance, or a group of employers has the authority to come up with additional standards. So let me give an example, not directly related to Clark County, but say that I want to go work for Bob's Ambulance Service. And Bob's Ambulance Service says everyone that works for Bob's Ambulance Service shall have a current national registry credential. That is not in conflict with the compact legislation. Compact does not require current national registry. In fact, you could have never have had national registry as long as you are licensed by a state in good standing. National registry is not individually required for you. Now, the state did say that from a date moving forward, everyone getting a license shall have registry at the time of getting licensure. But we have thousands of people who have a privilege to practice because they were licensed prior to that requirement. But Bob's Ambulance Service could say, I'm only going to hire someone who has current registry. That's a local level credentialing question, and that local entity has that authority to do that. Now, that entity could not say, for instance, the state could not say, I'm not going to recognize someone from another state, because their law says they shall be recognized. So in as much as it relates back to that particular question, and an employer can have additional requirements, the state is bound to recognize the privilege to practice, and the state is not authorized to add additional hurdles in addition to what the compact says, because they define in state law what the requirements are. So I'm happy to take some of those questions offline about a very particular jurisdiction if needed, but that's probably the general answer.
All right, we have one comment here from Edward that said that he received your book yesterday, and so far he finds it wonderful.
Thanks, Edward.
And then
Thanks
we have, oh, I'm so sorry.
Yep, thank you.
All right, and then we have one last question from Stephanie here, who asks, can a paramedic transport a hospital-to-hospital transfer from one state to another if not nationally registered?
Yeah, great question. So let me answer that in a couple of different ways. I'm hoping that the statute of limitation has expired and that my colleagues give me grace. So if I go back in time 23 years, I worked in Western Virginia on the border of West Virginia. I've never in my life been a licensed paramedic or certified paramedic in West Virginia. I was a paramedic in the state of Virginia. And countless times I did that very thing. I transferred a patient either from hospital to hospital or from home to hospital across the state line. Now, here's the reality. Every single time I did that, because there was no legal cover for me, I was in violation of state law in West Virginia. I practiced as a paramedic in West Virginia in the course of that transfer. Now, one or two states have passed laws that say, hey, we recognize the donut states around us, but most states do not. So I was across a jurisdiction without it. National registry, the back of a national registry card, or if you print the PDF, the second part of it clarifies national registry does not provide a privilege to practice anywhere. It's a certification of knowledge, skill, and ability. You have to have a state license. So in the absence of a state license, that practice would not be legal according to the letter of the law. The compact solves that, because if I go between compact states and I have a valid compact privilege, the moment I cross into another jurisdiction, my compact privilege is active and it covers me, and I'm legally authorized to do that. Now, let me give the other caveat to this. As a state regulator, that's not what we look for. Like in 10 years of regulating, I never went and said, ooh, let me do a stakeout and see who's crossing that state line. But if a complaint comes, if an investigation happens, and we're looking into that, and absent the compact or absent a state law that says I have the legal authority to recognize a license from another state, the individual would be practicing without a license, and that's a big deal. So I hope that answered your question. I can do a follow-up if needed. And I know we're out of time.
All right, that looks like all the questions we have here.
Well, Rio, thank you so much. And to the educators, thank you so much. If there's anything that I can do or if the compact can do, let us know. We recognize this is a new area of jurisprudence. We're here to help, and we hope to get some materials and textbooks here soon about the compact.
Perfect. Donnie, thank you so much for being here with us today to share on such an important topic. I will make sure that I put your contact information in tomorrow's follow-up emails. That way anybody can reach out to continue the conversation. For our attendees here today, I have put the link for the CE in the chat, and that will also be sent in tomorrow's follow-up email, as well as a link to a recording of this webinar. And on that note, that completes our webinar here. So again, thank you, Donnie, and everyone else for joining, and we will see you next time. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.